The Epistles of St. John, by the Right Reverend William Alexander, D.D. Introduction. Dr. Alexander was Bishop of Derry and Raphoe from 1867 until he was appointed Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland in 1896. He delivered the Bampton Lectures on Witness to the Psalms, and wrote commentaries on Colossians, Thessalonians and the Epistles of St. John in the Speaker's Commentary. He was one of the most eloquent preachers and published several volumes of sermons, such as Verbum Crucis, etc. The Gospel of St. John was written to create belief in the incarnate Son of God. The first epistle accompanied this Gospel as a sort of explanatory footnote, in which the author took occasion to warn his readers of certain heretical teachings which subverted the truth of the Gospel. The second epistle was addressed to a Christian mother in a spirit of pastoral solicitude. The third epistle commended the generous Christian hospitality of Gaius in unmistakable terms of appreciation. The teachings of these three epistles are luminously interpreted by Archbishop Alexander in a series of expository discourses, from which much may be gleaned for our own guidance. Preface. It is now many years ago since I entered upon a study of the Epistles of St. John, as serious and prolonged as was consistent with the often distracting cares of an Irish bishop. Such fruit as my labors produced enjoyed the advantage of appearing in the last volume of the Speaker's Commentary in 1881. Since that period I have frequently turned again to these epistles, subsequent reflection or study not seldom filling in gaps in my knowledge, or leading me to modify former interpretations. When invited last year to resume my old work, I therefore embraced willingly the opportunity which was presented to me. Let me briefly state the method pursued in this book. The first part contains 4 discourses. 1. In the first discourse I have tried to place the reader in the historical surroundings from which, unless all early church history is unreal, a past that never was present, these epistles emanated. 2. In the second discourse I compared the epistle with the gospel. This is the true point of orientation for the commentator. Call the connection between the two documents what we may, be the epistle the Hieronymian interpretation precisely as it stood, not preface, appendix, moral and devotional commentary, or accompanying encyclical address to the churches, which were the nurslings of John. That connection is constant and pervasive. Unless this principle is firmly grasped, we not only lose a defense and confirmation of the gospel, but dissolve the whole consistency of the epistle, and leave it floating, the thinnest cloud in the whole cloudland of mystic idealism. 3. The third discourse deals with the polemical element in these epistles. Some commentators indeed, like the excellent Henry Hammond, spy out Gnostics where there are none. They confuse us with uncouth names, and conjure up the ghosts of long-forgotten errors until we seem to hear a theological bedlam, or to see theological scarecrows. Yet Gnosticism, Docetism, Corinthianism, certainly sprang from the teeming soil of Ephesian thought, and without a recognition of this fact we shall never understand the epistle. Undoubtedly, if the apostle had addressed himself only to contemporary error, his great epistle would have become completely obsolete for us. To subsequent ages an antiquated polemical treatise is like a fossil scorpion with a sting of stone, but a divinely taught polemic under transitory forms of error finds principles as lasting as human nature. 4. The object of the fourth discourse is to bring out the image of St. John's soul, the essentials of the spiritual life to be found in those precious chapters which still continue to be an element of the life of the Church. Such a view, if at all accurate, will enable the reader to contemplate the whole of the epistle with the sense of completeness, of remoteness, and of unity which arises from a general survey apart from particular difficulties. An ancient legend insisted that St. John exercised miraculous power in blending again into one the broken pieces of a precious stone. We may try in an humble way to bring these fragmentary particles of spiritual gem dust together, and fuse them into one. 2. The plan pursued in the second part is this. The first epistle, of which only I need now speak, is divided into 10 sections. The sections are thus arranged. 1. The text is given in Greek. In this matter I make no pretense to original research, and have simply adopted Tischendorf's text, with occasional amendments from Dr. Scrivener or Professor Westcott. At one time I might have been tempted to follow Lachmann, but experience taught me that he is audacier quam limatier, and I held my hand. The advantage to every studious reader of having the divine original close by him for comparison is too obvious to need a word more. With the Greek I have placed in parallel columns the translations most useful for ordinary readers, the Latin, the English AV and RV. The Latin text is that of the Codex Amiatinus, after Tischendorf's splendid edition of 1854. In this the reader will find, more than 120 years after the death of St. Jerome, an interpretation more diligent and more accurate than that which is supplied by the ordinary Vulgate text. The saint felt the peril of presuming to judge others where he himself would be judged by all, of changing the tongue of the old, and carrying back a world which was growing hoary. To the initial essay of infancy the Latin was of that form to which ancient Latin church writers gave the name of rusticitatis, but it is a happy, I had almost said a divine, rusticity. In translating from the Hebrew of the Old Testament, Saint Jerome has given a new life, a strange tenderness or awful cadence, to prophets and psalmists. The voice of the fields is the voice of heaven also. The tongue of the people is for once the tongue of God. This Hebraistic Latin or Latinized Hebrew forms the strongest link in that mysterious yet most real spell wherewith the Latin of the Church enthralls the soul of the world. But to return to our immediate subject, the student can seldom go wrong by more than a hair's breadth when he has before him three such translations. In the first column stands St. Jerome's vigorous Latin. The second contains the English AV, of which each clause seems to be guarded by the spirits of the holy dead, as well as by the love of the living church, and to tell the innovator that he does wrong to show it violence, being so majestical. I have ventured with much hesitation to add upon another column in each section a translation drawn up by myself for my own private use, the greater portion of which was made a year or two before the publication of the RV. Its right to be here is this, that it affords the best key to my meaning in any place where the exposition may be imperfectly expressed. 2. One or more discourses are attached to most of the sections. In these I may have seemed sometimes to have given myself a wide scope, but I have tried to make a sound and careful exegesis the basis of each, and I have throughout considered myself bound to draw out some great leading idea of St. John with conscientious care. 3. The discourses, or if there be no discourse in the section, the text and versions are followed by short notes, chiefly exegetically, in which I have not willingly passed by any real difficulty. I have not wished to cumber my pages with constant quotations, but in former years I have read, in some cases with much care, the following commentators: St. Augustine's Tractatus, St. John Chrysostom's Homilies on the Gospel, full of hints upon the Epistles, Cornelius a Lapide, of older post, Reformation commentators, the excellent Henry Hammond, the eloquent Dean Hardy, the precious fragments in Paul's synopsis, above all, the inimitable Bengel, of moderns, de Sturdyk, Huther, Ebrard, Neander, more recently, Professor Westcott, whose subtle and exquisite scholarship deserves the gratitude of every student of St. John. Of Haupt I know nothing, with the exception of an analysis of the epistle, which is stamped with the highest praise of so refined and competent a judge as Archdeacon Farrar. But having read this list fairly in past years, I am now content to have before me nothing but a Greek Testament, the grammars of Weiner and Donaldson, the New Testament lexicons of Bretschneider, Grimm, and Mintert, with Trom's Concordantia 70. 4. On the whole, I really prefer St. John to his commentators, and I hope I am not ungrateful for help which I have received from them, when I say that I now seem to myself to understand him better without the dissonance of their many voices. Johannum nisi ex Joan ipso non intellexeris. 3. It only remains to commend this book, such as it is, not only to theological students, but to general readers, who I hope will not be alarmed by a few Greek words here and there. I began my fuller study of St. John's epistle in the noonday of life. I am closing it with the sunset in my eyes. I pray God to sanctify this poor attempt to the edification of souls, and the good of the Church, and I ask all who may find it useful, to offer their intercessions for a blessing upon the book, and upon its author, William Darien Raffo.